Welcome to this edition of the Cataract Specialist. Today I've got the great pleasure of interviewing Mr. David Lockington, consultant ophthalmologist from the Tennant Institute of Glasgow, who has a strong interest in research with 120 peer-reviewed publications behind him, and of course is currently president of the United Kingdom and Ireland Society of the Cataract and Refractive Surgeons. David, good evening.
Thanks, Eamon. Thanks for having me.
That's an absolute pleasure. Perhaps we could start, David, by if you could just run us through your consultant career to date and tell us where you're headed.
Sure. Well, I became a consultant in 2013, 2014, following my cornea fellowship in New Zealand with Charles McGee, which was a phenomenal experience. Wonderful to see another healthcare system, but also that they knew you were coming back to the UK. And so there wasn't this sort of train the competition, which is the fear often in fellowships. And so they showed me everything. I got to visit their private practices. I did many more transplants than expected. I got 6 or 8 peer review publications out of that time. And it really showed me that the more you put in, the more you get out. But that wasn't a new concept to me because I was a proud Northern Ireland boy, born and bred, went to Queen's University, did medicine, always knew I wanted to be part of a caring profession until they asked me, what sort of a doctor do you want to be? I had absolutely no idea. But being a junior doctor nearly killed me. I found general medicine unsatisfactory. I found it disorganized. And I remember sitting as a junior house officer in a peripheral hospital, and a senior medic said to me, David, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, honestly, Dr. Hunter, not this. And I credit Dr. Hunter with something which is just mind blowing if you put yourself in his shoes. So he was the senior medical consultant in this small hospital. And he said to me, what are you good at? And I said, not very much. But apparently, when I did my special study module in 5th year in ophthalmology, I could see the optic disc with a direct, which other people couldn't. And Dr. Hunter said to me, okay, on a Wednesday afternoon for the next few weeks, I will hold your pager and you can go to the ophthalmology clinic and get some experience. Now, that is unheard of. Imagine saying to someone in work, the junior doctor, oh, I'll do your job for you while you skive in an eye clinic for a couple of weeks. And through his generosity and vision and kindness, it gave me my first exposure to ophthalmology proper. I then got to know some people. I then got into the system and it was great. It was a steep learning curve. And then a massive curveball got thrown in 2007 when the government changed to NHS.UK, the company, and all junior doctors had to apply for run through training across the UK. And as a result of that, we had 48 hours to decide were we going to have a 1 year job in Belfast, which could have led to unemployment, or a 6 year job in Glasgow, which would lead to consultantship. And so, with a wife on maternity leave and a 1 year old child, we moved in 2007 to Glasgow. And that was difficult, but you either resent these things or you transcend them. And it was a real opportunity to then think, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it properly. And so it flourished from there. And so, having been in Glasgow, I knew I wanted to do an international fellowship. I wanted to do a world class one. New Zealand offered that. It opened doors, and then coming back, you had skills to offer and experiences to share. And so, with a base in Glasgow, it's led to me being, I did a simulation lead role in the Royal College for 4 years. That's recently finished. Getting involved in society like UKISCRS, the UK and Ireland Society of Cataract Refractive Surgeons, to share, be part of that community. And now I have the honour and privilege of being the figurehead for the next year, which leads into our 50th Congress in November 2026. So rather than resenting your circumstances, asking yourself, what's the best I can do in this situation? But that was part of my upbringing. I don't think that's anything unique, that if that's part of your upbringing, then you live up to that family name and you try to put others ahead of yourself and you try to see the best in things. So I think that has guided my consultant journey.
Very impressive and very inspiring story, if I may say. If you weren't a doctor and an ophthalmologist, what do you reckon you'd have been, David, instead?
I remember my career advisor at school asked me that question, and I said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to be a doctor. I want to help people." He said, "What if you can't do that?" And I said, "Well, then I'll be a lifeguard." Because I had been a swimmer all my days. I represented my town. I think I was the town captain. And I, through uni, worked as a lifeguard to pay my way. And it was great fun because it was being paid to talk to your mates. And as you can imagine, the mantra goes, the best lifeguard has nothing to do. And we literally did nothing. So, looking from left to right in a swimming pool, it got mind numbing on occasions. I could never do a full 2 weeks in a row at it, but I really enjoyed it. But it's humbling. It's good to learn to clean the toilets and check the water for the filters and all that sort of stuff, and speak to the general public and have a laugh. And I think, just to very quickly touch back in UKISCRS, my sort of mantra for that has been education and entertainment. And you learn a lot by engaging with the general public, be it in a swimming pool or in the eye clinic, and putting some humor into the proceedings normalizes the relationships and actually develops a connection and a bond, which otherwise you don't have. And if you look at the spread of ophthalmology as it gets more and more fragmented, we have become technicians to consumers rather than doctors to patients, and we lose something there. And I
Mhm.
don't think we realize quite how much we've lost until it's going to be too late.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. You've got to get that relationship absolutely right, haven't you? Let's turn to cataract surgery itself now, if that's okay. Um, which part of cataract surgery still makes you hold your breath, even after having done tens of thousands of cases?
That's a great question because it can deviate from the normal so quickly. You can be doing a simple incision and the patient moves, or you can be hydrating the wounds at the end and the Lear lock syringe can come off if it hasn't been appropriately attached, and the Rycroft can cause all sorts of dramas. I still think a good cataract is dependent on a good circular continuous capsular rhexis. And I defy anyone to love it when the rhexis starts running out. And it often runs out 3/4 of the way through because there's been viscoelastic being burped out. And I think I always know that if I've got a good rhexis, I have a much better chance of getting the nucleus out, but also I have somewhere for my backup lens support. And if I don't have that, so I guess the answer to your question would be the initiation of a rhexis and a white swollen cataract because it feels uncontrolled. No matter what you do, you can see it running away. You can mitigate it. There's lots of strategies out there. But Dino Wano, who's a great guru of cataract surgery and is on Keranet, the Corneal Society listserv, he talks about lens thickness being very important. And the problem we have is people like to think all white swollen cataracts are the same, and they are not. But if you have that vacuolated, bouncy castle style rhexis, you're going to get an Argentinian flag sign regardless of what you do, unless you use such a device like Zepto or the capsule laser, maybe some of these newer technologies. But I find that pressurized. But I have a friend, Ben Lahoud, in from New Zealand, who's in Adelaide now, and he talks about cataract surgery being the best arcade video game ever because you can never complete it and there's always new levels. And I think that's a good way to look at it. You need to enjoy the surgery. You shouldn't be intimidated by it. Yes, there's a wonderful quote from the Navy SEALs which says, people think that they will rise to the occasion, but that's not true. You actually sink to your level of experience or your level of competency. And that's why we should train so hard to get that bar as high as possible. So I think we shouldn't be complacent. And just as an aside, I hate it when people call trainees in particular call it a phaco, just a phaco, because I think they get through the phaco component and then switch off and then wreck the capsule in the IA. So I think you can only say a case is simple when it's being completed safely, and we shouldn't really be arrogant.
Just on that subject, how do you feel when you're supervising a relatively new junior surgeon in cataract surgery?
My daughter learnt to drive recently, and I sent a WhatsApp message around the group saying, "What's worse, teaching your daughter to drive or teaching a first year to do cataract surgery?" And unanimously, people said just pay for the driving lessons. But you're right. I mean, I would love to have a be hooked up to a monitor when I'm watching a trainee operate, but actually, the vast majority of them are very conscientious. There are very few cowboys out there. And with risk stratification and simulation, John Ferris's work has shown that using the IC simulator gives you a 39% reduction in cataract rupture rates in first and second years who have used simulation. And the reason being, they're higher up the learning curve. They know what they're doing. And the issue is that we have surveys of confidence, but that's really stupid. I don't care if you're confident. I care if you're competent. And if you know what you're doing and you've demonstrated it in the simulation lab, then in surgery with risk stratification, you'll get to do what you're able to do. And so you'll build on that safe foundation. So it's not like the olden days of see one, do one, teach one, just have a go. You need some complications under your belt. So by setting targets before the list, saying you're doing all this part in a modular style, it means we both have our expectations and it's much more relaxed. And I actually find training brand newbies much easier than getting a third or a fourth year who says, "Oh, I've done hundreds of these." And you look at it and you think, well, we need to break this back down and start again. I remember reading a book about Nike and their facility. I think it's in Portland, Oregon. And they take all these great people from around the world who are fantastic runners and they break them down and teach them how to walk, then how to jog, then how to run. And some people can't handle it because they're arrogant, say, "I'm a fast runner," but they break it down. And you sometimes feel that with certain trainees, that they sort of feel they're beneath this coaching. However, I would suggest we are all learning, and I would love to go back into people's theaters and be refined. That's one of the beauties of conferences where you can see videos of how to do things and maybe how not to do things.
And on that very subject, David, we've alluded to this in the chat prior to recording, but what are your views on live surgery at conferences?
Thankfully, we don't have it at UKISCRS, and I think it is unjustifiable. Because if you think about it, how has that patient been given informed consent? They have a surgeon who's clearly distracted. Yes, we all talk whenever we are teaching and doing an operation, but there's no benefit to the patient from being involved in that live surgery. And we all know that everybody in the audience is just hoping and praying that a complication happens because we want to see how somebody behaves under pressure. So it's really like the Colosseum and the baiting of what's going on. There's absolutely no reason why you can't record your surgeries, and we should record all our surgeries and then submit the recording, and someone can narrate it and can discuss what they're doing through that. And if you've recorded all your surgeries, you can then show when things which were simple became complex and when complex became complicated and what you do with that. So that takes the patient out of the equation. And I really think, if you ask yourself, would you like your operation with your surgeon on a microphone talking remotely? I really would struggle to find an ophthalmologist who would think that's a brilliant idea. So thankfully, technology means we don't have to do that.
I totally agree. If you could give just one tip to a junior cataract surgeon on their surgery, what would it be? What's the Lockington way?
I'll give you two tips very quickly. One is that you need to slow down to speed up. If anyone says to me how fast you can do a cataract, I respond, I can blind someone in seconds. So it's not about speed, it's about efficiency. So when anyone says to me, "You're a fast surgeon," I say, "No, I'm an efficient surgeon." And that's what I'm striving for, efficiency. And if you rush and have a complication, it's going to take much, much longer. So doing the rexus optimally, doing your wounds optimally, making sure you've had your hydrodissection wave, cracking appropriately, not having heavy hands, all those things, I'm putting those stages together means you'll end up being efficient and quicker. But we're not in a rush here. So that's the first thing I would say. You need to slow down to speed up, and you need to be efficient, forgetting what the actual time is. Obviously, if it's taking you an hour, that's not realistic. But to do it, I'm a 10 minute, I'm an 8 minute, I'm a 7 minute. Nobody cares. And the patient would rather you took your time as well. So that's the first one. The second one is about numbers. And when any trainee says to me, I'm worried about my numbers, I always say to them, so am I. You don't see enough people in clinic. To which they say, no, I didn't mean that. I meant my cataract numbers. And I say, exactly, because you're more than just a cataract jockey, you're an ophthalmologist. And that's why you need to work hard in clinic, not to earn the right to operate, but to develop the trust that if you do what I say in clinic, then I trust you'll do what I say in theatre. And if you know what you're doing, the numbers will look after themselves. I want to make sure you've got the building blocks in place so you can put it together and be a safe, effective, efficient surgeon, and the numbers will look after themselves. If you don't do that, you will have a problem with your numbers. So I don't care how many numbers the trainees get out of their 6 month rotation with me. I care they can do each stage safely. Obviously, I'm talking about first years. Each stage safely, they can put them together. And the majority of them are doing full cases within a few months, not because I'm an amazing teacher, but because they put the time in the simulation lab. They've been given a modular approach, and we all know what the game plan is. So it's not a numbers game, it's a competency game.
It sounds like UKISCRS is in very safe hands. I totally agree.
I hope so. Either that or we're going to spectacularly drop the ball at the 50th, but hopefully this podcast will encourage people to attend.
David, how sustainable or environmentally aware is your cataract surgery?
I feel very guilty answering this question, and I will put all sorts of silly jokes in to deflect from the reality. Um, if I don't have complications, then that reduces the carbon footprint of the patients coming back and forward, and I am genuine about that. I think we can't afford not to use adjuncts appropriately, and I think we need to invest to enable us to thrive and improve things. However, when we're talking about true sustainability, reduce, reuse, recycle, or even refuse, we have very little influence over that as the ophthalmologist within the NHS when you're told this is what you'll be using. Now, you can try to influence things, you can make proposals, you can put in business cases, but having a short term financial horizon means it's very, very difficult to initiate change unless you have a lot of support and backing. And as someone who does a little bit of travel for conferences and speaking, it seems a bit ironic that you fly around the world to tell people about green issues. I would like to say that the only green issue which matters is the size of the greenback because it's all about money. And people will only do things when they have an incentive to do things. So you'll only put things in your recycle bin if no one will pick up your bin if you don't. So we need to be saying to the companies, this is what has to happen, or we aren't going to be able to use your products. So, for example, we did a project a number of years ago looking at single use micro instruments compared to reusable. And we were being told the single use ones were expensive. But yet, when you opened loads and loads of different reusable ones, none of the forceps opposed. So, if you don't have a reinvestment strategy, it's pointless. Now, if you can fly fish all the way around the world, you can incentivize people to recycle the instruments which are single use. So the issue is not single use instruments. The issue is that single use instruments are not being recycled and reused. And it's criminal. I mean, I remember before prion disease, we would have just had a pair of forceps in the clinic and you just did a wee alcohol wipe and you used them time and time again, or the wee in the little bleach baths. And I'm not saying we should go back to that, but I think it has to be more than me stamping my feet and saying we need to look after the planet. It has to be legislation, it has to be government, it has to be big hospitals all looking at ways to minimize, so reuse, reduce, recycle. And those are great ideals, but they need to be pragmatic. For example, um, we wrote an article called Eyes, Economics and the Environment and point out that patient safety is the primary concern and patient outcomes is the primary concern. And I put in a line which said we should be very thankful to Neil Armstrong's bosses at NASA that they didn't say this is one small step for man, one giant carbon footprint for mankind, because no matter how much you criticize the cost of the space program and NASA, there are thousands of spin-offs from that program which have helped us. So we need to have context to this, not just take a small number, multiply it by a bigger number and get a bigger number and say, oh, we're all doomed. We actually need to say, how do we do this pragmatically? It's like, when my kids came home from school many years ago saying plastic is bad. It's like, right, okay, well then give me all your computer games and we'll throw them in the bin. Oh, no, no, no. So, we have to actually have some context to these things. But yes, we shouldn't be wasteful. And I think that'll be my bigger message. We live in a land of plenty and there are limited resources. So we should all be working together to reduce waste in any level. And we don't need to have this sort of Damocles sword of, and if you don't do it, your children's grandchildren will have nowhere to live. You need to say, we should be wise stewards of the gifts we've been given.
Very sensible. Similar question in a way. What are your views on bilateral same-day cataract surgery, David?
My gut reaction is I'm uncomfortable with this because that's how we were brought up. But time moves on, and evidence-based medicine should be our practice, not experience-based or what tends to be ego-based medicine. So there's lots of publications out there saying that immediate sequential bilateral surgery is safe, it's effective, but I think some of the arguments used could be refined, and UKISCRS have tried to put forward a few position papers on this and contribute to the debate. I don't believe that it is the solution for everything. And there's been interesting research done that when patients were asked after having one eye done, did they wish they'd had both done at the same time? And the answer 50% of the time was no, which means the answer 50% of the time was yes. So we offer it now on the NHS with the confidence that we have the two separate right eye, left eye routes to ensure there's no cross contamination or problems. The fear is the massive cost to prevent a bilateral endophthalmitis case. But other people would argue if you stagger your surgeries, you can refine your second one depending on the refractive outcome. Other people would say their research shows that they never changed the second eye target anyway. So what's the big deal? And they're looking at the refractive literature where people were scared of doing it and now they do it in both eyes. So I think if you have confidence in your systems, then I think it's appropriate. And certainly in the NHS, if you're doing general anesthetic patients, if you're doing patients who are going to struggle to come back in terms of their comorbidities, it makes perfect sense. And we've done that for a long time. It's just now we have the evidence base to defend the practice. But then you hear around the world that people don't get reimbursed the same for the second eye. So they have this perverse disincentive not to offer it. If you're asking me what I prefer, I offer it to my patients, and most people will just want the worst eye done first and see how it goes. But that's changing, and increasingly it would be the standard of care with the guidelines in place. One of the things I was just going to mention within that argument and discussion is that we do the worst eye first in surgeries. But obviously, in bilateral surgery, if you have a complication, you don't go on to do the second eye. So what I realized was that I had to do the more straightforward eye first to ensure that the patients got their bilateral surgery. Because if you do the really complicated eye first and then there's a problem, then they're not getting their second eye done. So there's little nuances like this, but I think it's becoming more commonplace. But I will come back to safety first. Your structures need to be in place to allow it to happen. And in my heart of hearts, I still like the opportunity to refine that second eye. But again, that depends on your working circumstances.
So if you had bilateral cataracts, David, would you have them done sequentially or at the same day?
I would probably have them done sequentially, but I'll answer that because obviously I would be asking for more premium lens technology.
Mm.
And I think I would want to. So I'm not a massive believer in dominance. I think dominance is a massive deal in the young refractive patient. I accept that. But in the elderly person with bilaterally dense cataracts, I don't think it really matters. And it's actually quite hard to prove it if they've got bilaterally dense cataracts. So, what I would want for my eyes is probably I would want to get my distance correct in one eye. And if there's an error in that, we have a second chance to get my distance correct. Or if I'm happy with that, switch to a mini monovision style for the other eye. So having that, and Millen Pandy would talk about, filling in the blanks with his custom vision strategies. We've done this in one eye. What are you happy with? What do you feel you're missing out with? What are you going to do in the other one? Now that's not easy, obviously, in the NHS. It's easier in the private sector. Um, but I think I would probably err on that side.
And what lens would you have inserted in yourself?
Is I wouldn't go on social media and hold up the lens box and say, I'm the first in the world to ever have this lens put in. And I often wonder, what do patients think when they see that? What does the previous patient think when they know, oh, you put in a different lens in your next patient? What was wrong with the one you put in me? And what does the patient think who gets that first in the world lens and thinks you've absolutely no experience what's going to happen? So I think that's um, a very bizarre concept that you want to be seen as not just an early adopter, but the first to do anything. And and then the other thing I find quite amusing about that is people get all sorts of contortions. So you then get, I'm amongst the first in Northwest Scotland to put in this device. And you feel like, so you're not the first, So I don't understand what kudos you think comes with that. And again, if we're being honest, a lot of people have relationships, shall we say, with the various companies which they're promoting. And this is because of how things are done. Often things are bundled. So you may have a machine and how it's financed is based on lenses, or you become a unit which does all of a particular range. And that's fine. But I just don't understand that message. What message does that send? So I'm a very young 40 something at the minute. So um, as long as I don't get steroid induced cataracts, which I'm not on steroids, so I shouldn't, um, I would like to hope there's technology in the future which we haven't seen yet, which means that we don't need to, I won't be using any of the present set of lenses. I do find it interesting, however, when you do go round the room of elderly ophthalmologists, and I use that word carefully, a lot of them want low myopia with a monofocal lens, and they're happy to just have driving glasses. And I just find that interesting. We do all these contortions about our optics and our angles and our measurements. And, Gerd Arfort says, there's no free lunch with optics. I'm sure many people have used that phrase. And it's a compromise. And monofocals will give us the crispest vision. I've worn glasses for 30 odd, 35 years, and it hasn't affected my modeling career that much. So, you know, what what problem are we solving? For some people, that's a really big deal. For others, it's not as big a deal.
It's a simple
And
message.
so
Keep it simple, stupid, isn't it, really?
I think you're right. And I think it's also you know too much. So I think there's another element, it's bizarre. You get the whole thing about, oh, you're an eye doctor, but you haven't had your eyes lasered. And yet there's lots of evidence that loads of ophthalmologists have had their eyes lasered, and that's
Yes.
totally fine. Um, but if you don't want that, and I asked somebody once, I said, what am I supposed to say when people keep saying to me, you're still wearing glasses whenever and they said the answer is you like your glasses, and for the vast majority of the time that's okay. It frustrates me the odd time, and maybe at the end of this conversation I'll book in for a laser procedure with someone because the evidence is there. And I think if I was 21, I would absolutely get laser eye surgery now. But I would lose my reading if I got rid of my myopia. No, so it's an interesting debate. I am tempted at one of the conferences, the way we do the complex cases. I am tempted to anonymously stick up my biometry and topography and just see what people would say as
You
a sort
should.
of group think, and then reveal that it's me. And they'll be like, with your personality, no chance. You know?
Well, at least you've got insight.
The thing, isn't it? Damien Gatnell, who's done incredible work. But he wrote something recently which I've been saying for years, which is his research shows that the people who benefit most from cataract surgery are those with visually significant cataract.
No.
So it shouldn't surprise us that the technologies being used are most beneficial to those people who have serious visual issues with pathology, though obviously performance comes into it and it comes down to your lifestyle and all those other factors. So, as I said, if I was 21, I'd be the first in the queue now with all the evidence. But in my mid 40s, I'm probably your worst candidate.
Okay, so final question for you, David. If you had cataract, I know you don't because you're too young, but if you had cataract surgery tomorrow, who would you choose to be your surgeon?
That's a very, very good question. And I am and I'm not going to answer it, but I'm going to tell you I am privileged to be surrounded by very competent colleagues, both in the UK and abroad. And I am amazed when I go to these conferences thinking I'm here to teach and I learn much more. There are people out there who do incredible jobs in incredibly difficult circumstances, and they're not in the limelight. They're not boasting on social media. They are doing mission camps. They are dealing with rocks. They are doing all sorts of complexity, and it puts me to shame. And I'm in awe of them. And so I think the future is bright because the people who will be operating on my eyes are probably my trainees. So that's why I need to make sure they're properly trained. But as I look around the world, I hold very little regard for some of these self-appointed lists of excellence. And I look and listen at the videos. And I look and listen at the videos and I see the people who not only know how to operate, but they know when to stop operating. And you see some videos and you think, oh my goodness, there's no way you should be deviating from the normal that much. And you see other people. So the person I would like to operate on my eyes, and I said this to um, a private patient I had once, where I did their cataract, and I'm from Northern Ireland, so I didn't know this Scottish person was quite as well known, shall we say, as the people in the Nuffield knew. And I did their cataract, and halfway through, the eye went. So I got the whole cataract out, and halfway through, and then the eye went rock hard.
Yep.
And I said to him, "I'm really sorry. It's not safe to continue now." And I'm thinking, I'm going to be in the papers as the person who blinded this important person. And the next week, we came back. The aqueous misdirection had broken. We did the IA tidy up. We put the lens in, and he had a great outcome. And I've been at conferences where people would just shove the needle in at 3 millimeters and just aspirated and hoped that it was fluid misdirection and not a bleed. And I said to that patient afterwards, you didn't pay me to do the cataract surgery. You paid me to know when to stop. And he agreed and was very grateful. And I was very grateful. And that's the person I want to do my operation. I want someone who knows when to stop. And again, plug, that's why you go to conferences like UKISCRS to see the complexity, to hear what you do in these situations. And the hardest thing for a surgeon is not to do things, but actually that's, I think, would be my conclusion in that situation, that I want someone who knows when to operate and when not to operate.
If I may say, you've answered that last question like a scholar, gentleman, and a true president of UKISCRS. So thank you. David, I hope
Well,
you've
that's fair.
enjoyed yourself. Thank you for
Yeah,
chatting.
thank you so much, Simon.
Pleasure.